Hey guys, just here with JHart Modelworks. I am finally ready with the next installment on the 69 Mustang from Revell that we're doing a wide body Restomod on. I'm sorry for the delay, I kind of have a lot going on. But this episode is going to be all about the interior, so without any further delay, let's go ahead and get this camera flipped around and get started. So our door cards have some fairly nice detail. It is a little shallow, but they are molded into the body, making it really hard to detail them. So the first thing we're going to do is fix that. We want to start by adding some Tamiya panel liner to the door panel lines. We'll then use some odorless mineral spirits on a piece of paper towel to clean off the door cards themselves. Now when we shine a flashlight through the white body, it's a little easier to see where the panels are, so we can mark them off with a marker on the outside. Once we can see them easier, we can take our JLC razor saw and cut the door card away from the tub. I got this on eBay and it is an awesome little saw. The upside is that it is super thin, so when it cuts, it leaves very little gap. The downside is it's very thin and it's a little bit brittle. So if you flex the blade sideways, it will snap very easily. If you pick one of these up, I recommend grabbing some spare blades as well. Now while I was rambling there, I did use some masking tape to mask off the bottom edge so that we could get a line started with the saw. Once we have a nice line started, we can then remove that tape and it'll be a lot easier to just go back and forth with the blade to cut it free. Now that we have the door card off, we want to take some sanding sponge to all the edges of the door card and the interior tub to get everything nice and smooth. Now we're going to use some Tamiya Extra Thin to glue some evergreen strip plastic to add some tabs to the sides and the bottoms. This way, when it's time for assembly, we can easily reattach the doors to the tubs and everything will line up right. I think the strip that I'm using here is like 6mm wide. It doesn't really matter as long as it covers the gap and will hold things in place. We just want to cut a short piece for the front and the back and a long one to go along the bottom. Apply some Tamiya Extra Thin, stick it in place and let it dry up. We of course do not want to glue it back onto the tub, that would defeat the purpose. Now there is a small recess at the top of the front where the dashboard seats. Try not to glue any strip here or trim it away like I did off camera, because if not, it will interfere with the dash seating. Now with the door cards separate, we want to make a couple of modifications here. We're going to use our dead center tool that I got from Scale Pro Shops to make small pilot holes in the center of the base of the window crank and another up here on the top of the door near the rear end of the door. We can then take our 0.5mm drill bit and we're going to drill out both of these holes. Also want to use some 400 grit sanding sponge to sand off the debris and clean up the holes that we just drilled out. Once both holes are drilled, we're going to take a chisel to remove the molded in window crank. You could use a hobby knife, but be very careful, we don't want to cut up the door. And again, we want to clean it up with some 400 grit sanding sponge when we're done. And the last thing we want to do is we're going to use a scriber to rescribe all of this trim. This will make it a little easier to mask things off for painting, because we're going to be painting up like 3 or 4 different colors here. Time for a quick test fit and we can move on. The kit seats have mount points molded into the tub, and these are going to interfere slightly with our 3D printed seats, so we're going to take our chisels and we're going to remove them. These chisels are really handy. Again, you can use a hobby knife here, but I highly recommend a set of chisels. You don't need anything crazy expensive. I use a fairly cheap $10 or $15 set off Amazon, and there's probably even some cheaper options out there. We just want to work the chisel at the surface from several directions until you whittle away the raised surface. As for the pedals, you could use your chisels to remove these as well and replace them with some 3D printed ones or photo etch or even scratch build some. But with this being a closed top car, you aren't really going to see them, so I'm just going to come back later and paint them. We have everything painted up in our base colors, so it's time to do the flocking. We're going to go with some nice charcoal gray. I just got this brand new bag in from Flocking Unlimited. Now it says craftflocking.com on the label, but if you go to that site, it gives you a not secure warning. And once you click on their flocks to actually shop, it redirects you to Flocking Unlimited's website. So maybe they changed site names or something, I'm not sure, but go to Flocking Unlimited. Now, this is a 4-ounce bag. I paid $16 for this bag. This little bag here came from Model Car Garage, and I paid at least $5 for this. Now this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, at least 7 times the size and twice as thick. So you are easily getting at least like 12 times the flocking for 3 times the price. There are some places you save money at, and there's others you don't. You know that I'm the type of guy that spends top dollar for paint and finish supplies, but something like this is where you pinch those pennies. And on top of that, the guys that are selling you these small bags are going to places like this and then reselling it to you for a huge markup. Now, this place offers smaller bags, but I think this is the best bang for the buck. Heck, you and a couple of friends can each throw in $5 or $6 and split a bag and still have a ton of flocking each. To bind our flocking, we're going to start with some Elmer's PVA glue. And we're going to add just a little bit of water to thin this out a little. We want to mix this up really, really well. Now these are milk caps, by the way. My family likes that expensive milk in the glass jar. It comes with these lids. Now when I return the jar for the $2 deposit, I keep the lids because they don't want them back, and these are awesome for holding things like glue. Now we need a little bit more water here. We're going to stir this up a little bit more, and that is about perfect right there. Next, we want to load up our tea strainer. Don't use your wife's tea strainer. Get your own. They're like $1 or $2. No one wants fuzzy tea. Also, I've masked off the molded in floor mats at the bottom. And we want to take an old brush and brush in a nice healthy layer of thinned down glue onto our floor surface. We don't want to get it on the seat, we just want to go right up to the bottom edge. The same goes with our center console. Just run this right up to that bottom edge. And now we're just going to tap out our tea strainer, and it's going to sift out a nice thick layer of flocking on top of the glue. We want to do this before that glue has a chance to dry. Don't press on it, don't try to push it into the glue or anything. Just put a nice healthy layer down, nice and thick, and just let it dry. Now we're going to do the other side as well as the area behind the rear seat. Now technically the very back wall and the side walls should be plastic, but Restomod. He added carpet to make it look nicer. Yeah, that's what we're going with. That's the nice thing about doing Restomods. Some neckbeard, as Frank calls them, tries to rivet count you. That shouldn't have carpet on it. You just look at them and say, Restomod, and walk off. We're going to let this sit off to the side for an hour or two to dry up, and then we will turn it over and tap the excess off onto your sheet of paper. You are using a sheet of paper, right? Do this over a sheet of paper. Okay, so after tapping off the excess, I take it outside and I take my airbrush and blow off any loose excess, not anywhere near my spray booth. I take the compressor and the airbrush completely outside and I blow it off far away from my garage so I don't get flocking, bits in my paint or clear coat on a future build. This stuff is like glitter. If you have kids that craft, you know that stuff gets everywhere and it shows up for months. Now the reason we do this over a sheet of paper is so that we can fold the paper up just like this and pour the excess flock back into the bag. Waste not, want not. Okay, with all of our base painting done, we need to knock out some detail painting. We're going to start with the Display Silver marker here, and we're going to hit all these large buttons and trim rings on the dashboard. Now be careful not to hit anything else. You can clean this up with something like UMP airbrush cleaner, but isopropyl alcohol will mess up our base colors and you'll end up having to repaint. We're then going to come back in with some Vallejo Model Air Black and a 0.5mm mechanical pencil, and we're going to start hitting all the buttons. Now, that one just to the right of the steering column is actually the ignition switch, and it should have stayed silver. I messed up and painted it black. I did catch myself sometime later, and I came back and painted over it with some silver to make it silver again, so don't mess up and paint those black. You also want to come in and hit these two large knobs for the radio as well. Okay, next up we're going to add some Tamiya panel liner to the recessed rectangle here. And we're going to clean the excess up with a cotton bud. Now, if we're really careful, we can tap a clean cotton bud to this and it will wick away just enough panel liner to expose the lettering. Now we can just set that aside to let it dry up while we move on to something else. While that's drying, we're going to take care of the center console. We're going to start by applying some Vallejo Model Air Silver to these buttons down here. And we're going to paint these rectangles as well. These are actually holders for the seatbelt buckles. Now I won't be using them for that, but this is what they are for on the 1-to-1 car. I tried really hard to do just the trim around the ashtray in silver and leave the ashtray itself in NATO black. That's what that dark gray color is NATO black. But after about 3 failed attempts, I realized I'm just not that good. So I repainted it a 4th time in the NATO black, and now I'm hitting just the inner portion of the ashtray with the display marker in bright silver. Now onto the door cards, and these two rectangles on the lower portion of the door cards are actually lights. We're going to hit the front one with some Vallejo Model Air White. I'm not a huge fan of this paint. It's really thin and it doesn't cover well, but for this situation, that thinness is going to do us a favor. It's going to make it look kind of like that clear translucent white instead of just a bright white. Now for the rear one, we're going to carefully add in some Tamiya Clear Red. We're also going to hit the tops of these two small knobs on the center console with the red as well. And we're going to hit the knobs for our 3D printed window cranks. The design files for these are probably one of my biggest selling files on Colts 3D. They are available on my page in the description below. I've been playing with designs for my own seatbelt hardware. They aren't quite ready for sale yet. They need to be rescaled a little first so the ribbon fits better. The original designs for the buckle is a little bit just too thin. But I have manually scaled these and we're going to play with some prototypes on this build. We're going to start by cutting off a small piece of 1/16 inch or 2mm wide ribbon. When cutting your ribbon, cut it to a sharp angle so it makes a small sharp point at the end. This is going to make it a lot easier to thread your ribbon through the openings even when you're working with photo etched seat belts. We're then going to cut the pointed end off. We want to add a little bit of glue to the inside of the ribbon and fold it over the end of the latch. If you have any excess ribbon left over at this point, you can trim it off with a hobby knife once the glue is dry. We're going to cut another piece of ribbon for our buckle, and this is where my seat belts are different. The opening runs all the way through the buckle. We want to slide the ribbon through starting at the back of the buckle and pull it all the way through the front so a little bit of ribbon sticks out the end. Then, while holding the ribbon and buckle in place, we want to trim off the front end so it's nice and straight. We'll then add a little bit of CA glue to the very front of the ribbon. I'm gluing both sides here. And we're going to carefully pull the ribbon back into the buckle so that the glued end sits just inside the buckle structure. Be careful not to pull too far and pull the ribbon all the way back through. With the seatbelts assembled, we want to glue these onto our seats. We're going to start with the latch. That's the metal piece. I'm going to figure out how I want it to lay. Then I can add some glue to the side of the seat where it won't be seen and press the ribbon down. Once that glue sets, we can then trim off the excess ribbon. Now we don't want the seatbelt to stick up in the air, so we're going to add a drop of glue to the seat surface, and then we're going to press the ribbon into the glue. Next, we're going to add the buckle, and we're going to do pretty much the same thing. Now make sure you alternate sides between the two seats. The buckle always goes towards the center of the car, and the metal latch goes towards the outside. We want to figure out how we want the buckle to lay out. I'm going for a different angle here so it looks a little more used. We'll glue the end to the side, and then we're going to trim the ribbon off. This time I chose to add the glue to the underside of the buckle, and then I just pressed it down to the seat as well. Now the rear seats don't have sides that we can hide the ribbon ends under, so we want to figure out our length and cut the ribbons at an angle that will be similar to the back of the seat. We'll then add a little bit of glue to the end. I'm being really lazy and messy here, but I got away with it. And then we're going to press the latch ribbon into place next to the side of the car. Now we're going to add a little bit of glue to the seat, and we're going to glue the ribbon down into place. We're going to repeat that with our buckle side, and you'll notice that I did cut it considerably shorter on this side. That's how it looked in the reference photos I found online. And I'm going to add a little bit more glue on this end, and we're going to nudge the buckle to the side just a little bit to give it a little bend. Once we have all the belts in place, we're going to add some glue to the bottom of the front seats, and we're going to set them into the top. Again, you want to make sure the buckles go towards the center of the car. Once we have the seat set, we then want to dry fit the door card up against it to make sure that we have the seat positioned so that we have enough room to add the door cards later without any interference. We can glue in the other side. And that is a wrap for the seats. Next, we want to assemble our dash. Now our kit does not contain any gauge decals, so I went to Best Model Car Parts on eBay and I got some of his gauges for this car. This guy makes fantastic gauges. Now they are not decals. He prints them on glossy photo paper, like a cardstock. So what we want to do is we're going to use a hole punch to punch our gauges. Now this is the hole punch from Micromark. It's stupid expensive, but it does a good job with these very small circles. You want to slide your paper in between the clear acrylic sheet and the metal sheet, and we're going to line the gauge up with the nearest matching hole. You're then going to take the corresponding metal pin, we're going to set it in the hole on the acrylic, and then hit it with a hammer to punch the gauge out through the metal plate below. Once you have your gauge punched out, you can then use your choice of glue. I'm going with CA glue, and we're going to add it to the kit part, and then you just set your gauge down into place and you try to get it lined face up. The passenger side, I believe, has a clock above the glove box. We're going to set that in place the same way, and then we're going to repeat this process for each of the gauges on the dashboard. Now the set also has a radio face and I think maybe the AC controls, but I'm not really going to bother with those. Since we're using a 3D printed Momo steering wheel, we do not need this mount point. I'm just going to cut it off with some display nippers, clean it up with a hobby knife, and then paint it black. You won't notice, it'll look like a shadow. Next, we're going to add a little bit of glue to the back side of the wheel mount, and we're going to set that into place on the column. And then we can glue our steering wheel down onto the mount. And that is our finished dashboard. Now we need to finish up the door cards. During our prep, we drilled some holes in the top of the door near the rear, and we're going to make some door locks using some Top Studios washers. We're going to be using the 1.1mm size and some 1mm Top Studio rivets. We're going to start with a 0.6mm drill bit, and we're going to open the hole just a little bit more. The 1mm rivet has a 0.5mm post, so that extra 1/10 of a millimeter is going to give us a little more wiggle room and give us some room for the glue. Now we want to thread the rivet post through the washer. Now this is probably the most frustrating part of this entire endeavor. I'm not even going to waste your time with the 30 or 40 failed attempts at this. This is the one that worked. Once we finally have the washer on the rivet, we're going to add a tiny bit of glue to the very tip of the rivet, and then we're going to set the rivet into place in the door. We don't want to push the rivet all the way down unless you're going for that locked door look, but I want it to be open, so I want it to stand up a little bit, and we're just going to glue the tip in. Now once you have the rivet in place, we want to push the washer down to the surface of the door so that it sits flush with the door. With the door locks done, we can now add my 3D printed window cranks. These are one of my favorite designs and one of my best sellers on the Colts 3D page. Now I designed these with a small 0.5mm post on them. We're going to slide that post through the hole we drilled during prep. Then we're going to add a little bit of CA glue on the back of the door card so no one will ever see any of the glue mess. We'll just give that a little nudge into position, and voila, our door cards are done. Alright guys, it is time to wrap this up. We're going to start by gluing the shifter into place. Now this has a weird lean to it. It leans towards the driver. That is normal. Don't try to sand it flat like I almost did. Next, we're going to add a little glue to the tabs we added to our door cards, and we're going to seat the door cards into place. For the dash, I'm going to add a little bit, maybe a little bit too much glue to the back inside of these mounting slots. And when you press the dash into place, you want to make sure that it seats all the way down properly so you don't run into any issues hitting the glass later. Hopefully. So the kit has this roll bar. The instructions don't say to use the roll bar, and honestly, I don't really like the roll bar, so I'm not going to use it. However, the kit has these holes where the roll bar should go. So my solution to this was to go find and 3D print the Shelby Cobra snake emblem after shrinking it way down to fit, and I added a small little pin to fit inside the hole to make a cap to cover those openings. We want to add a little bit of glue to the top of the mount points, and then we're going to set our Cobra caps in place, and I want to turn them so that the Cobra snakes face outside the window, as if you're looking into the car from the outside, you can see them. We're just going to repeat that for the other side as well. And that's going to be a wrap for our interior. Now, I didn't really discuss this earlier, but our base colors for this are Tamiya's LP60 NATO Black and LP13 Imperial Japanese Navy Gray. So all the dark gray stuff like the dashboard, the center console, the steering wheel, that's the NATO black. All the rest of the gray is the IJN gray. And for the red, we went with Zero Paint's Ferrari Bordeaux red. Everything on this looks really good. I love how easy the seatbelts were. Again, those will be coming to my Colts 3D page very soon. If you follow me over there, you'll be notified when they come out. I just have to do a little more tweaking to make them ready for everyone else to use. And by the time you see this, I should be in Houston at the Space City Shootout, hosted by the Houston Automotive Modelers Society. But when I get back, our next steps are going to be to get the glass and headliner installed, get the interior tub installed and the chassis mounted, and then we're going to finish off the exhaust and the suspension. Thanks for hanging out with me, guys, and watching the video. I always appreciate when you hang out and build with me, and I will catch you on the next one.